Hello and thanks for joining us for France in Focus. This week we're at the Château de Courson, which is a beautiful 17th century property about 35 kilometres south of Paris. Well, it's the perfect backdrop for this week's edition because we're talking about the French nobility. That's a social class which here in France enjoys no legal status. However, you'd be wrong to assume that la noblesse no longer exists. In fact, according to some estimates, there could be more people who today claim to be part of the French aristocracy than there were before the French Revolution. Well, in a moment, we'll be taking you to meet the owners of this house. But first, let's talk you through a few numbers.
On the eve of the French Revolution in 1789, there were 17,000 noble families in France. Only 2,800 survived. Just 20 years later, Napoleon Bonaparte created the imperial nobility, granting titles to the high-ranking members of the military, economic and cultural spheres. In the 19th century, 400 families were given noble status. Around 3,000 families in France are still considered aristocrats. Identifying them by their surnames is not enough. Only 1 in 3 families have a name which stems from nobility. The defining clue is the word de, which sometimes precedes a surname. But that doesn't mean everyone whose name contains a de is a noble. Former President Charles de Gaulle was no aristocrat, whereas the author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, was. Many families were given this particle by order or decree, and for those who lost it during the French Revolution, it's possible to get it back. An application must be made to the Garde des Sceaux, and an approval must be obtained from the ANF, the Association for the Mutual Assistance of the French Nobility. But whether you're an aristocrat or not, it changes nothing in the eyes of the Republic. Count, Baron, Duchess, these titles are considered secondary. They can appear in administrative documents, but confer no rights in particular.
Bienvenue.
Well, we're now in the Italian drawing room of the Château de Courson, which has been in the family of Olivier and Patricia de Nervaux for more than 2 centuries. They're with me now. Thank you so much for welcoming us into this beautiful house. It's got about 30 bedrooms, and I'm just wondering, does this feel like home?
I grew up myself here until the age of 10, and then I came back every weekend at the time of my grandmother. And since we moved here about a few years after we got married, and since then we've almost never left it. And our children grew up here, went to school here, so it really is our home. And that's where we have our roots, and hope to continue to have them here.
Now, this is someone particularly important, isn't it, in the history of the house?
Yes, this is General Duc de Padoue, General Arrighi de Casanova. He was the great-grandfather of my grandfather. He lived here from 1820 to 1853, until his death. He was the general of the Napoleonic Empire. He was a second-level cousin of Napoleon and was a general on almost all battlefields of the empire. This man played a great role in the development of Courson because his wife brought Courson in her dowry, and he dedicated his time and energy during those 30 years to the restoration of the property that had been devastated by the revolution.
Don't you recognize him?
Yes, that's a very familiar face. And this is a very important portrait of Napoleon, one of the official ones.
Yes.
That was done at the time of his rule.
Right, this is a painting of Napoleon by Girodet, who was the official painter of the court, of the imperial court. It represents Napoleon with all the attributes of power. You can see the crown of laurels, the ermine and purple robe, the civil code, which bears the name of Napoleonic Code, to which he gave his name, which has suddenly been a tool of the influence of Napoleon in continental Europe. And it was one more detail showing that Napoleon takes over, or tries to take over, all the attributes of powers of pious dynasties, saying, now I'm the man who rules all over these territories, and I'm the continuity. I am not a newcomer, I'm in the wake of all the preceding dynasties.
Obviously, a house like this is a great pleasure, a great privilege to own, but also a huge responsibility, isn't it?
We feel the responsibility. We're a sort of link in the chain of this magnificent estate. So it's up to us to develop ways to attract the public. We're a sort of museum, really, and we organize activities, both indoor and on the grounds. It's a cultural space for events. We put on concerts, operas.
We're managers of a cultural space, and we feel strongly that we have to try to transmit this to the future generation, and in as much as possible make it not too difficult to manage, and a pleasant place for them to live, and remain also a family house, which has been so far, and hope will continue to be.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Patricia and Olivier de Nervaux. Thank you for speaking to us. We're going to take you now 165 kilometers south of where we are now to another stately home, the Château de Cheverny, which has been in the same family since the reign of Louis XIII. And for those of you who know Tintin comic books, this chateau might look rather familiar.
It's one of the most famous palaces in France's Loire Valley. Cheverny was immortalized in the classic comic book series Tintin as Captain Haddock's mansion at Marlinspike Hall. Its real owner is Charles-Antoine de Vibré. Cheverny has stayed in his family for over 6 centuries, but it's more than just his home, it's also a major tourist attraction, which welcomes 350,000 visitors every year. This spring, de Vibré expects crowds to stop and smell the flowers. He spent 20,000 euros on 120,000 tulips.
It's always costly, but you need to know when to invest. To get people to come, then come back in droves, you need to give them something beautiful to look at.
De Vibré runs the sprawling estate like a small business and employs 50 people. Cheverny receives no government aid, which means it relies on tourist dollars to survive. To attract new visitors, de Vibré's wife has launched exciting new plans.
We've created a tea room, we've created suites, and expanded the boutique.
Stretching over 200 square meters, Cheverny's gift shop brings in nearly €1 million a year. Constance de Vibré hopes her new idea to open up the chateau's annex to guests will have the same success. For 370 euros a night, this family will get to sleep a stone's throw away from the palace. But Cheverny's upkeep is expected to eat into any new income streams. Here on the building's north facade, all the plastering needs to be redone at a cost of 450,000 euros. But this hasn't stopped Charles-Antoine from planning Cheverny's new vineyard. De Vibré hopes his plans will bear fruit before he gives his youngest son the keys to the castle.
We're now back in central Paris, in the 8th arrondissement, at the Chapelle Expiatoire, which is a chapel dedicated to King Louis XVI and his wife Marie-Antoinette. To talk to us more about the subject of the French nobility, I'm joined now by Professor Éric Monsieur-Rigaud, who is a historian at the Sorbonne and also an expert on this very subject of the French nobility. Thank you so much for talking to us. Let me start by asking, Professor, what does it mean in the 21st century to be part of the French nobility?
The nobility in France was killed off in a civil sense in 1848. Legally, noblemen no longer exist. They belong to a closed group, which one can only belong to by birth because the Republic no longer bestows titles. They're a very small minority, 3,000 families, 100,000 people, or 0.2% of the French population. All their privileges were revoked during the French Revolution, so to maintain power, they now have to fall back on whatever skills they possess.
So has someone kept records? Are there archives out there to prove who is from which family?
Nobility is not presumed, it has to be proven. And families have to provide documents which are authenticated by the Commission of French Nobility. They will check the lineage of the person who claims to be noble by going back through their ancestors until they reach the person who was recognized as noble under the old regime, or an ancestor who was ennobled in the 19th century, because these continued until the Second Empire.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you to use your imagination now, Professor. In the very unlikely event that the French people decided to restore the monarchy, who would be the rightful heir?
In France, the only descendants of the Bourbons are the Orléans branch. They descend from the last of the Capetian dynasty, who reigned over France, King Philippe. The crown would go to their eldest living heir, the current Count of Paris, who is the head of the de France family. However, for about 30 years now, the claim to the French throne has come from the House of Bourbon in Spain, which is directly descended from Louis XIV. But at the beginning of the 18th century, the Treaty of Utrecht said that the Bourbons of Spain could no longer claim the French throne. So, from a historical point of view, the House of Orléans has the legitimate claim.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Professor Éric Moncion-Rigaud, thank you so much for speaking to us. And thank you to you for watching. I'll see you again soon here on France 24.